Every day, millions of Canadians entrust a crown corporation, CanadaPost, with their livelihoods. It's an institution built on trust and a promise of fairness. But for some, that trust is shattered. I will show you an uncovered system hidden behind the mail trucks and the corporate seal that allegedly operates with bias, unfairness, and the power to quietly destroy a life. This is the story of my unjust termination. I was a dedicated employee. I followed the rules. I helped serve the community and the people I worked with. I was diligent in my duties and looked at helping the corporation succeed. But despite this, I was terminated with bias. I was vocal about CanadaPost's ridiculous contracts with SNC and CanadaPost's operational decisions to sign these contracts that bleed money out of CanadaPost. These companies given these contracts who just happen to donate back to the politicians who aided in giving these contracts out. That sounds unethical to me. Seeing this, I created a solution on my own time to this national problem which would have fixed the bleeding of Canada, post money and create jobs for CUPW, but that was sidelined. This action shows my work ethic going above and beyond to solve operational issues including CanadaPost's financial issues. Let's put this into monetary context for you all. When someone calls the helpline, a CRM is created and will cost CanadaPost $60 paid to SNC. In just one facility, I did a report, and it revealed that my facility would have spent approximately $1.6 million in a year just for the initial calls, excluding the ridiculous lock change contracts SNC has in place that belongs this figure. Now imagine that there are 482 more of these facilities in Canada and 22 processing plants and 5,800 other postal outlets, all that receive CRM complaints. I wonder how CanadaPost's finances would look if $500 to $600 million per year was not being bleed into potentially political contracts. I strongly encourage an investigation into this, as this would solve CanadaPost financial issues. Anyways, let's get back to the real issue. I was suspended after a breakup with a girl who cheated on me, who lied from the beginning of the relationship. CanadaPost said this was a workplace issue. False complaints against me were then placed. A defamation and harassment campaign led by the ex-girlfriend. Her best friend and her other friends was allowed to go unchecked by CanadaPost, spreading malicious rumors and harassment that was not just limited to the workplace. Outside of the workplace, such as stalking, unwanted surveillance, car vandalized, prank calls, and much more. CanadaPost then shown a pattern of reprisal, blocking my harassment complaints, violating human rights laws, labor laws, and a number of other legal policies, showing their bias, blatant sexism, and manipulating a process. CanadaPost then impacts the investigations, denying witnesses, denying video camera reviews, ignoring evidence, and continuing to actively deny my rights to fairness and impartiality. Instead of addressing equality, CanadaPost's machinery allegedly pivots, fabricating reasons to remove me. Makes you wonder if my termination had anything to do with speaking logic to CanadaPost poor financial management and these corrupt contracts that extract money out of this crown corporation. CanadaPost achieved its prejudgmental goal of my termination. It was biased from the start. CanadaPost targeted my stellar performance. CanadaPost ignored facts. CanadaPost manipulated internal procedures, ignored laws. CanadaPost ignored human rights, ignored labor laws, and ignored CanadaPost's own policies for fairness and equality. They knew it was unfair, but they had the power and were set at destroying me. My termination wasn't about my work. How does a system designed for fairness become an engine of injustice? The power imbalance is staggering. This isn't just a corporate policy failure, it's an alleged abuse of public trust. They weaponized the complaint process, impacted independent investigations, and then leveraged their immense resources against a single individual to block his rights and prejudge his guilt. The end result is designed to silence the truth and destroy a life financially, take away his career, take away his retirement, and professionally ruin. My life was turned upside down. I lost my income, my benefits, and the security of my future. Was this because of the breakup, outside of the workplace, or was it because I spoke the truth about what was happening inside Canada? The call to action. This injustice can only be stopped by public pressure. This is a crown corporation and accountable to all Canadians. You have the right to demand integrity. We call on the federal government to launch a fully independent financial and operational review to expose the alleged mismanagement and abuse of power at the highest levels. This is about more than mail. It's about holding power accountable. Don't let them silence the truth. Demand justice. Let's review some of Canada Post violations, shall we? For generations, Canada Post has been a pillar of our communities, a trusted symbol of connection. But I will expose a darker side. I was subjected to a pattern of violations within this crown corporation. Allegations of bias, unfairness, and abuse of power that aren't just isolated incidents, but systemic issues with profound consequences for individuals and public trust. This is a look inside the system and what it truly costs. Here are some of their violations. The law is simple. Every worker has the right to safety and dignity, but behind the doors of Canada Post, the law is being ignored. Despite the strict federal mandate of the Canada Labour Code and Bill C-65, I have personally faced the consequences of a system that fails to protect its own. This is not policy. This is violation. This is my story of Canada Post breaking the law. Now I will address the Serious Human Rights and Canadian Human Rights Act, CHRA, violations committed by Canada Post, and their ongoing intentional disregard for these fundamental protections. This section will expose how Canada Post's actions and failures have breached core principles of equality, dignity, and fair treatment, ignoring both federal human rights obligations and their duty to maintain a workplace free from discrimination, harassment, and bias. Through documented patterns of misconduct, procedural unfairness, and selective enforcement, Canada Post has demonstrated a systemic failure to uphold the rights guaranteed to every employee under Canadian law. Canada Post's breaches of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the organization's deliberate disregard for the constitutional protections owed to all individuals. Canada Post's conduct has violated the core charter principles of equality, fairness, and protection from discrimination, undermining the fundamental rights to security of the person, freedom of expression, and equal treatment under the law. These actions reflect not isolated mistakes, but a systemic pattern of disregard for constitutional values, where employees have been denied due process, silenced, and treated unequally based on bias and personal prejudice. This section will outline how such violations contradict the spirit and intent of the Charter itself. Now I will outline Canada Post's violations of common law principles and established case law precedents, demonstrating a clear departure from the standards of fairness, good faith, and duty of care owed to employees. Through its actions, Canada Post disregarded long-standing judicial rulings that define proper employer conduct, procedural fairness, and the protection of employee reputation and dignity. These breaches not only undermine the integrity of Canada's legal framework, but also show a willful neglect of precedent-setting decisions that hold employers accountable for unjust treatment, bad faith investigations, and the infliction of mental distress. Canada Post didn't just violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canada Labour Code, and the Canadian Human Rights Act. They also broke their own internal policies. This section exposes how Canada Post repeatedly failed to follow its own established procedures designed to ensure fairness, respect, and accountability within the workplace. From mishandled investigations and biased decision-making to breaches of confidentiality and procedural integrity, these actions reveal a culture of selective enforcement and disregard for corporate policy. By ignoring the very rules meant to govern their conduct, Canada Post demonstrated that its internal standards were treated as optional rather than mandatory, eroding employee trust and organizational integrity. Canada Post has a legal and moral duty to uphold the collective agreement established with the Association of Postal Officials of Canada, APOC, an agreement meant to protect the rights, fairness, and working conditions of its members. But did Canada Post fulfill this duty? The answer is no. This section will outline how Canada Post repeatedly violated key provisions of the collective agreement through unfair treatment, procedural bias, and disregard for contractual obligations. By failing to respect negotiated rights and due process, Canada Post not only breached its agreement with APOC, but also undermined the trust and integrity that form the foundation of unionized labor relations in Canada. Canada Post's privacy and evidence violations, which reveal a serious disregard for employee confidentiality, data protection, and the integrity of investigative processes. Canada Post mishandled sensitive personal information, failed to safeguard private records, and denied fair access to evidence essential for defense and due process. These actions breached not only privacy legislation and internal policy, but also the basic principles of justice and transparency. This section will detail how such violations compromised trust, tainted investigations, and exposed a culture of negligence toward the privacy rights of employees. Canada Post's conduct extends beyond national borders of wrongdoing. It represents a blatant violation of ethical standards and international human rights principles recognized around the world. Their actions defy the very values Canada claims to champion: dignity, equality, and respect for every human being. By engaging in systemic discrimination, psychological harm, and deliberate disregard for fairness, Canada Post has betrayed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Labor Organization's core conventions. These aren't just policy breaches. They are moral failures that expose a culture where power is abused, truth is suppressed, and human worth is treated as disposable. In this section, we confront Canada Post's ethical collapse and its clear breach of the global human rights commitments that Canada is sworn to uphold. Across every level of law, federal, human rights, and ethical, Canada Post's handling of harassment, investigation, and dismissal processes reflects a systemic failure of fairness, integrity, and compliance. The documented actions show repeated violations of Bill C-65, Canada Labour Code, Canadian Human Rights Act, privacy laws, collective agreements, and international human rights standards. These breaches collectively demonstrate a pattern of institutional bias and disregard for due process. These breaches and violations have destroyed a fellow Canadian life with extreme prejudice. Canada Post destroyed a career, destroyed my financial security, destroyed my retirement, destroyed my mental health. Canada Post has ignored their own core values, the law, and stepped on a person's rights. This is not acceptable. It is despicable. Please comment and share. Stand up for my rights and for the rights of every Canadian.